Hey everybody, it's Ms. Warner. I'm sorry that I'm missing you again today. I promise I'm going to try my best to not miss you guys anymore. But I wanted you to see my face. Hello, I'm here. And I wanted to go over a couple of problems with you guys before you take your quiz. So I have an example here, and then we'll look at another one in just a second oh, my face is not in, sorry, I'm doing this from my watch, so sorry, forgive me. All right, so hi, now you can see my face. I wanted to show you guys a couple of examples, so we'll do this one and then one more together. So these kind of look similar, not necessarily quite as difficult as these, but these look similar to the questions that you're gonna have to graph on your quiz, like extreme version, but these are the kinds of questions I'm gonna ask you, so I wanted to talk about each of these things. So first of all, we're looking at a sine equation. You guys should know by now that your amplitude is the absolute value of whatever your number in front of sine or cosine is. So the amplitude for this problem would be 2. The formula for the period is 2 pi over b, where b is the number that is multiplied by x. So that would be 2 pi over 3. All right, your formula for phase shift is the absolute value of c over b, and then we want to figure out if we're going to the left or to the right. So c is the number that's added or subtracted from x, so that would be pi over 3, because c is pi and b is 3, and then based on this minus, we know that we're going to be moving to the right. Okay. Your vertical shift is found using the last number, so whatever is being added or subtracted from your function. And so our vertical shift is going to be up 1. Sometimes you'll see this written as the midline, which is what we called it last class period, but that's the same thing. So if you see vertical shift, hint, hint, all I want you to do is tell me if it's going up or down. Okay, so domain and range. The domain of all sine and cosine functions is all real numbers, or negative infinity to positive infinity. And the range is going to vary based on what your vertical transformations are. So what I do know is that my graph is shifted up 1. So my midline is at 1, and I know that my amplitude is 2. So I'm going to go up 2 from the midline, so my maximum is going to be 3. And then I'm going to go down 2 from the midline, so my minimum is going to be -1. So the range is going to go from -1 to 3. So as far as I can remember, this is the list of stuff that I'm going to ask you for on your quiz. So make sure that you are able to get all of those on your homework. Feel free to ask your neighbors if you need any help with any of those problems. So what I want to look at next is taking all of this information and actually putting it into a graphical form. So let's see, I'm going to get rid of some of this just because we don't need all of this to graph. We don't need this in order to be able to graph it. All right, so the rest of this I'll leave for now. So I would suggest making a table at this point, especially when you have this many things going on. If you only have 1 or 2 transformations, you may not need to do a table, but I would suggest it for this one. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is we want to identify our x values just with the period change, and then we'll shift them left and right. So the period is 2 pi over 3. We know our first x value is 0. Our last x value is 2 pi over 3. So our middle one is going to be half of this. So that's going to be pi over 3. And then half of that would be pi over 6. And then, so we have pi over 6, 2 pi over 6. So this would be 3 pi over 6, which is the same thing as pi over 2. So those are our original x values without shifting. So what we're going to do next is shift these pi over 3 to the right. Let's see, pink looks pretty with blue, we'll do that. All right, so the first one's easy. If we take 0 and we shift it pi over 3 to the right, that's just going to be pi over 3. All right, so to shift pi over 6, You may want to do some scratch work over on the side of your paper. So I want to take pi over 6 and add pi over 3 to it. But in order to add those two together, I need to have a common denominator. So the common denominator would be 6, so I would need to multiply by 2. So look, this is 1 over 6 and 2 over 6. So if you add those together, you're going to get 3 over 6, which is the same thing as pi over 2. Okay, so that's the work that I'm doing for that. All right, so the next one will be a little bit easier. So I am taking pi over 3 and adding pi over 3 to it. Those already have a common denominator, so that's just going to be 2 pi over 3. All right, now when we add the phase shift to pi over 2, our fourth x value, I'm going to kind of repeat that process that I did for the pi over 6 problem. So pi over 2 plus pi over 3, those need to have a common denominator, and which would be 6. All right, so these would turn into 6's, and then we have 3 pi plus 2 pi. So this is going to end up being 5 pi divided by 6. All right, and then my very last one, these already have a common denominator, so 2 pi plus 1 pi over 3 is going to end up being 3 over 3, which is just pi. Okay, so those are a little bit more difficult x values than what you guys did for homework and what we did in class, but keep in mind you can always do this fraction scratch work on the side of your paper. So our x-axis is now done. All right, now we just need to do our y-axis. So for our y-axis, we know that the sine function always starts at its midline. So its first y value is going to be 1. And then the sine function normally goes up to its maximum, but because this is negative, it's going to go down to its minimum, and it's going to go down 2, because that's the amplitude. So it's going to go down 2 from here, so it's going to go to -1. Then it returns to its midline, and then it goes up the amplitude to have its maximum. So it's going to go to 3, and then it ends on its midline. Okay, so definitely the x values are the hardest part. But once we do that, we now have everything we need to be able to graph this. So I'm going to get rid of all of this so that I have some room. All right. All right, so y-axis, it's going up to 3, it's going down to -1. My midline is going to be at 1. And then my x-axis is going to be pi over 3, pi over 2, 2 pi over 3, 5 pi over 6, and then pi. All right, so once you get your y-axis and your x-axis labeled, then you are ready to go ahead and put it on your graph. Let's go back to this blue. All right, so at pi over 3, I'm at 1. Pi over 2, I'm at -1. 2 pi over 3, I'm back at 1. 5 pi over 6, I am up at 3. And pi, I am back at 1. Okay, so there is your transformed sine function. So keep in mind that this would look quite a bit different from our original function, which is not, you don't need to know that for your quiz. You just need to be able to do your finished function. On your quiz, I do provide an x and y axis for you. So make sure that you look at how things are scaled on the y-axis and how things are scaled on the x-axis. On your quiz, some of the tick marks on the x-axis are labeled and some of them aren't. So you may need to label the ones that aren't already labeled for you, but they should be like well scaled so that it's easy for you to graph. Okay, so this is like as hard as this could possibly get. You have every transformation happening at one time. Not all of the ones on your quiz are going to look like that. So I want you guys to try one. Obviously, if you can do that one, then you're going to be perfectly fine for your quiz. But I do want to make sure that you can do some that are more simple. So let's look at y equals cosine of 3x plus 2. I want you guys to make sure that you can just do a more simple one like that. Or how about this? Let's just stick a negative in front to add a little bit of extra stuff to it. So go ahead and work through this one. I guess I'm asking your substitute if you can pause the video for a second and let them work, see if they can get all the way through this one. And then if you'll start playing again in just a second, then I will work through it as well. Well, I'll put the answers up so you guys can watch. So I'm going to pause it and then start it back up in a minute.